Thanks for making the time again. It's amazing to, yeah, like I said, it's amazing to see what the progress that you're making. Today we're going to talk about idea generation.
Sorry, Anurag.
And it's like I've spoken to a few groups now, and I think it's really important to narrow down your solution and who it's for before you start generating ideas, because it's really easy to kind of get attached to ideas. But I think it's like it doesn't make sense to generate ideas if you still haven't narrowed down the problem. So if you're still not still like don't have a good grasp of the problem that you're focusing and who's experiencing it and why it still exists, then yeah, don't wait, don't start generating ideas until you do. But yeah, we'll go through it, and then yeah, feel free to ask any questions as well. Okay, so today I think we're going to focus on two things. So the first one is understanding the process behind creativity and how that actually works when it comes to generating ideas. And the second one is to apply like idea generation and evaluation techniques to kind of go broad and find out what ideas are possible, and then kind of go narrow and say, okay, what idea do we actually really want to work on and that we think has the best chance of solving this problem. So focus today, I'm gonna go through the UXD process and where we are in it, talk about creativity, and then yeah, like I said, talk about generating and evaluating ideas. We'll also cover market research, because I think you'll be amazed at how many ideas we come up with that have already been done. And if we can kind of understand, what our competitors doing, what can we learn from them, what ideas have succeeded and failed, and what can we learn from that, then that gives us a much bigger chance at making something successful. So last week we covered problem framing. This week we're going to cover ideation. And next week we're going to cover prototyping and testing. So creativity. Does anyone have any questions? Actually, before we start, does anyone have any questions about what I said so far?
No, good to go.
Cool, awesome. Happy with the approach.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So when we talk about creativity, what, especially in like in the context of coming up with ideas, really what we're talking about is creative imagination. Like, how many different ways can we imagine a solution to a problem? And interestingly, this can actually be boosted by changing your environment, right? Like, you'll find, for example, people kind of go into a specific room in their house when they want to come up with ideas, or in a specific room in their work, or they'll go to the park, for example, and start coming up with ideas. So environment is a really big problem. The other thing is actually creativity is almost like a muscle, in terms of like the more you train it, the better it becomes. So it's definitely not something that you'll spend a couple of minutes and come up with a brilliant idea. It does take a bit of time. So there's two components of creativity as when we're talking about generating ideas. The first one is divergent thinking, right? And the point of that really is to come up with as many ideas as possible that focus on a specific concept or topic or problem. And this is like typically pretty fast, right? Like, you're smashing out the ideas pretty fast. You're more likely to like set a timer. It's kind of it's supported by intuitive thinking, which you don't really need to kind of spend a lot of time thinking. You can just like push out ideas quickly. So here's our first exercise. So the first exercise, and we can do this on the Miro board as well. I'll create a space for you. The first exercise is to generate 50 ideas for using a plastic bottle. Does that make sense? So you can, so a good trick to learn is, per post-it note on Miro, or even in real life, do one idea per post-it note, because then that helps you cluster them and group them. So Whereas if you do multiple ideas per person node, that's not so easy anymore. Okay. Time's up. All right. What did you think of that? Who wants to share some thoughts on how they found that activity?
It was good actually to find the alternatives of bottle. It's like kind of unconventional.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome.
There were no rules or no specifications with respect to how I can use it. So I went a little um, outside the box.
Awesome. I'm loving the spirit animal. All right. Christelle or
Mm,
Vardman, how did you find that?
mm, I just realized that most of the stuff I came up with are pretty much more on recycling or reusing the water bottle
Mm-hmm.
more. Like, yeah,
That's
that's
that's an
all.
interesting reflection.
Yep.
But
Uh,
Vardman, how did you find that?
I mostly could relate it back to what I have used it at a personal level.
Yeah.
So, and whatever I think it can be used
Mm-hmm.
for any societal purposes as well. So I just wanted
Yeah.
to that angle as well.
Cool. Awesome. So one thing I think that's important to know about like when you're coming up with ideas, usually people will start off like pretty good because they already have kind of, they already can think of like what they've seen plastic bottles get used for or what they've personally used it for. And then usually people start dipping because they run out of ideas or they feel like they do. But then if they keep trying to generate more ideas, what actually happens is they go up again because they start going on a tangent in terms of like, oh, hold on, like maybe you can use it for this other category of things. Like maybe it's not just recycling. Maybe you can use it for like food storage, or maybe you can use it to play games. Um, so it's really important to actually, like, once you get to that dip, to keep going, because that's like after that is really when you start getting the creative ideas. Because before that, what happens is that you're kind of applying your life experience to the ideas that you're generating. But after that, you're sort of thinking of more creative ways of, or more creative ideas. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So good work. I don't think anyone quite got to 50, but we'll do a group exercise in a little bit that to kind of group them. So convergent. So once you've kind of gone through the divergent thinking in terms of like thinking broadly and thinking quickly, and in a creative environment and having a time limit to help you speed up. What the next part is convergent thinking, where you converge. Um, and this helps you evaluate the ideas for usefulness, right, within the main problem or topic. And you'll notice that when you do it individually, what happens is that you're less likely to kind of influence each other, right? And that's why it's actually pretty important to do activities like this individually first and then as a group, because that helps you kind of come up with ideas on your own, and then you can kind of come back as a group and discuss them. So convergent thinking, yeah, like I said, it helps you evaluate the ideas, and this is supported by a different type of thinking. Like rather than intuition, you're actually using like different type of thinking, which is analytical, right? Which actually like takes a bit of effort. It's not slow, and it's not fast and intuitive. It's kind of slow and deliberate. Um, yeah. Okay. So here's the next activity, and we'll do this for 10 minutes. So we'll just do one group, I think, because yeah, we have 4 people today. So basically, I've created. So you need to group the ideas by themes, right? So you might have a theme that's kind of around like playing, right, or instruments or food storage, and then you kind of group the ideas there. And then I want you to decide on 2 criteria. So you can do this as a team to kind of say, okay, what are we what criteria are we assessing these ideas by, and then pick your top 3 based on those 2 criteria and sketch them. Does anyone have any questions about that?
None.
No questions. Okay. So basically what you can do is you can start, I created a big board for you called synthesis, and I want you to kind of start dragging your post-it notes or other people's post-it notes as well into kind of separate kind of groups that say like this group is for this group is for that. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Fire away. Okay, so we'll talk about generating ideas. So these are some guidelines in terms of how to kind of work as a team to generate ideas. So the first one is deferred judgment, and that's why it's I think that's part of the reason why good to it's good to come up with ideas individually and then share them, because then there's you kind of avoid that judgment until later. And the point with that is that defer judgment long enough so that the idea can kind of have time to breathe and expand based on your conversation. And then don't judge it too harshly. Don't put the idea in this is impossible too quickly. The second one is use yes and. So for example, if someone comes up with an idea, right, I can say yes, we can do that, and for example, we have to consider how much this will cost us, right? So, and try to build off each other's ideas as opposed to kind of putting judging each other's ideas. The next one is one conversation at a time. So it's really important as a team to have one conversation at a time, and then that way you're kind of talking about the idea that you're discussing or the group of ideas together, and you're deciding where it should go, especially when you're prioritizing it or when you're selecting the top ones. The next one is be visual and tactile. So one thing that people often do, and that's actually pretty helpful, is instead of writing down the ideas, they'll actually draw it, right? And drawing is really important. Jason Fried talks about how important it is when you have an idea to draw it out, because then it helps people understand what it is that you mean. Whereas just using words, say for example, if we're talking about using using a plastic bottle as a bowl, right? I could be imagining a thin, tall plastic bottle in my head, and you could be imagining a thick, short plastic bottle, right? So drawing it out actually helps nut out those kind of helps us both agree on the same thing. The next one is to prioritize quantity. So like we said, when you're coming up with ideas, don't focus on quality, just focus on, just bringing out as many ideas as possible. The next one is, like we said, keep the focus on your problem framing. So for example, if you're focused on aged care or helping older people, then focus all your ideas on that. If you're focused on, say, mental health, then focus all your ideas on that. And like Chris Steele said, how you prioritize your ideas will actually depend on who it is you're targeting. For one group of people, it could be a low priority ideas, but for another group of people, it could be a high priority idea. So it's really important to kind of understand what problem you're solving and who it is that you're solving it for before you come up with ideas. Again, the next one is kind of similar to that, which is trying to make sure that each idea answers the question of how might we, which addresses the problem framing, and then keep the focus on your user or your customer, the people that you really focused on helping or solving the problem for, and be in an engaging environment. Some people, like to go to a room full of drawings, or another team will like to go to the park. So pay attention to your environment, because that does affect you. Any questions?
None.
One quick question, suppose as a team we come up with lots of ideas, and they're quite different, and there's some difference of opinions and or something, then how to arrive to a common point?
Good question. I think a lot of it is through discussion and kind of talking about what the idea will solve, right? But also how easy it is to implement. So you could have two really good ideas, right, that you think will solve the problem. But if, for example, one idea is much easier and cheaper to implement, then it makes sense to go with that idea. So, we'll talk about evaluating ideas. That's literally the next thing. So that's a really good question. Anyone else?
Oh, I also have something to add on. Was it Prasanna who asked about that thing? If there's a difference of opinion, sometimes too there are another good way for you to come with a compromise is that you and your group mates should try to see the similarities of what you have, and yeah, that's where you can start coming up on how are you going to agree on your terms. So yeah, just try to at least find the similarity of the thing. But that's all. But you could continue.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that as well. All right. So evaluating ideas, like Prasanna asked. So one is complexity and impact, right? And like we did with our activities, you kind of, the top right is like, or for example, for this, what you might do is you might actually want the bottom right, right? Like something that's high impact but low complexity. And you can define complexity in different ways. Like, you know, do we need to develop this as an app, or can we just use no code tools, right? The next one is cost and value, right? So if it's really valuable, right, or you know, if it's really valuable for customers but low cost for you, that's really good. Whereas if it's, you know, high cost and low value, then there's not much point pursuing that. The next one is basically to prioritize. Basically, give it a score out of say 5 for how desirable it is for people, how feasible it is in terms of its implementation, and how viable it is. So, yeah, kind of, and you could do this individually. So, kind of, you know, find out what are the top 10 ideas that we want to do, and then individually score those out of 5, and then come together and see, you know, is there a clear winner in terms of an idea that, you know, scored 4 or 5 on all 3 criteria, or do we need to kind of talk about it a bit more? Any questions about those 3 sorts of evaluation frameworks?
From like this feasibility and desirability, like these things, they might like I don't like, in my opinion, they can't be universal, right? Like in some country or some region, this one specific thing can be more desirable or more feasible, but it might not to be that feasible or desirable in other part. Then how to with it, like how to resolve, how to make your design or product universal?
Yeah, cool. So that's really interesting, right? Because so regardless of where, regardless of regardless of how big you want your product to be, I think you have to target a specific market initially, right? So if you think about like Facebook, even though right now it's universal, it actually started in a university, right? And it started with university students. And if they thought about how can we make this work for everyone, it wouldn't have worked for anyone. Yeah. But because they kind of focused on on, you know, who are the people that we actually really want to focus on to use this tool, or who's this going to be most useful for. I think that's important. And I think the other thing that comes with is, say you decide on trialing the idea in a specific part of India, right? How you roll that idea out might look a bit different in terms of how you roll it out, say in India versus Thailand, right? But the core of the idea will be the same. Does that make sense? So, like, for example, you might need to do extra legal work in Thailand, for example, but the core of the actual, like, implementing the actual idea is about the same. And it's really important, actually, that you ask that question, because context does matter, right? Like, for example, if your idea is like, you know, requires a change in the legal system, then it might be really desirable for people, but it's not very feasible, right? Because it's pretty difficult to change the legal system. So that idea might be kind of, you know, deprioritized, because until the legal system changes, there's not much point kind of pursuing it. Yeah, so I think it does, like, by picking like a group of people that you're really focused on solving the problem for, that will help you identify, kind of narrowing down how feasible and viable this idea is.
Thank you.
No, thanks for asking. All right, so next part we want to talk about is market research, and these are just guidelines And you don't have to do it for every idea. What I would recommend is like once you have the top 3 ideas that you're thinking about, is like each person does a bit of research around, is this idea, for example, already implemented, and the competitor is like way too strong and there's no point in pursuing it, or is this idea actually something that's been tried before and failed, and we can learn a lot from what other people failed in. So the first kind of groups of questions is around the market trends. So where's the trends kind of going? Like where, for example, if you're looking at aged care or older people, where is aged care going in the next 10 years, and where has it been the past 10? And then you want to focus on competitors. So like, who else is a player in this market? Why do people go to them and use their services? Why do people not go to them, right? Because that can help you differentiate yourself. And then the third category there is lessons, like who's tried something and was successful or failed, and what can we learn from that. So it's really important, because I think a lot of the ideas that we have, you can learn a lot from doing like quick market research to understand what's happening in that space. Any questions about this bit?
No, I'm good.
Cool. All right, so here's the plan for this week. So I think the groups are doing really well in terms of defining their problem framing. I think some groups still need to kind of spend a bit more time to kind of get to the root cause. So it's to define your problem framing, generate ideas, kind of like how we did in our activity. So it's really important to actually start visualizing it, and that could be like drawing it, it could be brainstorming, it could be anything that you can use to kind of communicate what your idea is about and what it's trying to do. Complete the solution canvas, which I'll send to everyone on Slack tomorrow, and schedule time with me again to talk about, this is the problem that we're focused on. This is how this is all the ideas that we generated, and these are the ideas that we're focused on. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
Cool, awesome. Thanks so much for making the time to